Okay, so for an object to work with the Gravnull and actually be able to be interactable and picked up, it needs the following attributes. First, it needs some type of collider component, some collider, whether it's a box, a capsule, a sphere collider, a mesh collider, something for the Gravnull to actually collide with and detect. Right? So if you're using a mesh collider, make sure you check it on to be convex. Otherwise, you're going to get a warning about a non-kinematic convex mesh collider. So make sure that if you are using mesh colliders, which I recommend staying away from as much as possible, but to make sure they're set to be convex. So the first thing it needs is a collider. The second thing that the game object needs is a rigid body component. This way that the physics system can take over and the object will be dynamic. The next thing that our object needs is a phys tag. So remember in the wind turbine, when we're checking walking into a trigger volume, we're checking if the tag of the object is player, right? We've created a phys tag, and if you don't see it in the project, you can go ahead and just add it yourself, which is the capital P, the HYS. So basically, when the Gravnull is hovering over or collides with another object, it checks to see if that object is tagged as phys, and then if it is, it will go ahead and pick up the object. The next thing that the game object needs is to be set onto the Gravnull layer. This will also apply to all the children. All the children should be set to the Gravnull layer. All right, so those four pieces are what an object needs to interact. So a collider of some kind, a rigid body component, set to use the phys tag, and set on the Gravnull layer. All right, so another thing to keep in mind with when setting up your objects to work with the Gravnull is where that object's pivot point is located is going to determine how that object is picked up with the Gravnull. Right, so here you can see as an example, the the tire has the pivot point at the bottom center of the object, and you can see that's being picked up in the center point of the Gravnull is where that object is being moved to, right? So that bottom pivot point is moving to the center of the Gravnull. You can see it looks a bit offset. Versus here, when our pivot point of the tire is in the center point, that center point moves to the center of the Gravnull and looks much more correct, right? Or looks much more fluent. So be careful, if, for example, if you have crates in your level you want the player to stack, by default, if you just make a cube and try to pick it up with the Gravnull, it's going to be located at the corner of that object, right? So the corner of the object will go to the center of the Gravnull, and it looks a little bit odd. So utilize the center pivot or set pivot action in ProBuilder. So if you just select a game object and hit center pivot, like you will do on your tire, the pivot will go to the center point. You can also select a specific vertice or a group of vertices and use set pivot, and it will go to that location specifically. So you can set it to be a custom location for each object. All right, so now that we have like just a single base object, if you want to have a cube work with the Gravnull or a cylinder or something like that, you can also create more complex looking objects visually that can work with the Gravnull. All right, so you might see when you play your Scraps intro scene that there's that boombox that starts out right there for the player. So breaking it down, this boombox parent, this is what the Gravnull is actually picking up and interacting with. Right, so here you can see this game object has our box collider, it has a rigid body, it has the phys tag, and it's set to the Gravnull layer. So if there was no mesh, the Gravnull could still pick up and interact with this object that we see here. Right, notice you can see the box collider, that is what the Gravnull is interacting with. But what the player sees is this object right here. Right? So you can see the boombox and then all of these cylinders and cubes. This is the actual mesh. This is what the player sees as just following along with this boombox parent, which what the Gravnull is picking up and moving. So you can set up an empty game object to be interacted with the Gravnull, and then from there you can just have the child objects be the meshes that are just following along for the ride. Very similar concept to animations, right? You animate your parent object and then the children are just following along. Also, I will mention at this slide that you can have multiple colliders on one object that will work with the Gravnull. So if you have an odd-shaped object, say you have like a table, and the table has legs, or you have like a chair, and you have like the chair has a back, you can have multiple box colliders on one object, and that will still detect and work with the Gravnull.